So I wanted to talk about the Kosel. Now I've talked about the Kosel in the past. It's a very interesting topic. I'm just going to give a little bit of an overview of the creation of the modern Kosel, because there's a shaila I want to handle that I think does not really come to people's minds too much. Now, as follows: the Kosel, obviously we know, is at the foot of the Har Bayis. Now the truth is that I say obviously we know it's at the foot of the Har Bayis. That wasn't a given for all of Jewish history. There was many Greisei Talmidei Chachamim, amongst them people who had even made it to Yerushalayim, who had maybe seen the Kosel with their own eyes, who thought that the Kosel might be the wall of the Azara. Because of that, there's various different chumras attached. How close you can go to the Kosel, they have to go, X amount, different shittas. Of those, Lamashal the Radvaz, who's one of the Gedolei Achronim, I think he's an Achronim, borderline, but Gedolei Achronim, from the first Achronim, the Shalos Shuvas Radvaz. He lived in Egypt, then he moved to Eretz Yisrael. He was in Yerushalayim. He has several chuvas about the Har Bayis, about where, what's where, and etc. So he was actually pretty clued in. And Afal Pikin, in one of his chuvas, he writes that the Kosel is the wall of the Azara. It's like one of the remaining walls of the Beis HaMikdash. He also, I think, is predisposed to believe that, because the way we describe the Kosel is that the Shechina never left there, and the Shechina lived in the Beis HaMikdash. The Shechina didn't live in the Har Bayis, even though the Har Bayis is Mekodesh. The Mishnah in Kalim tells us Eser Kedushas, and one of them is the Har Bayis. The Har Bayis does have a certain madrega of Kedusha, but the Shechina lived in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The Shechina lived, in the Heichal, and therefore there's a presumption that if we say Lezaza Shechina mitach Kosel Maravis, it means of the Azara. Other poskim later on, Lamashal B'Chai Yadam, in his tshuva, in his one of his svarim writes that this is the walls of the Azara. But today the consensus kemat by Roiv Minyan Ubinyan poskim. And Zecher, once they started doing, topographical research of the mountain and figuring out exactly what this wall is, most poskim, gedolim, talmidei chachamim, secular scientists, topographers, geologists, etc., all believe that the Kosel is the retaining wall of the Har Bayis. Now, basically, when the Beis HaMikdash was built, Chazal tell us that the size of the Har Bayis was chamish me'es amas by chamish me'es amas, 500 amas by 500 amas. Now, 500 amas by 500 amas is about anywhere between 750 to 1,000 feet squared. The current modern Har Bayis is much larger than that. It's much larger than that. Additionally, the current Har Bayis is not square; it's rectangular. If you look at like a bird's eye view, a 20,000 foot view of the Har Bayis, it's rectangular shape. It's not square shape. So it's clearly expanded. Now, when was it expanded? So at the end of Bayis Sheni, there was a king whose name was Herod the Great. Herod the Great was a Jewish king who was very secular. He came after the Maccabim and all the kings of the Chashmonaim. He kicked those kings out. Chazal themselves did not have any love lost for the Chashmonaim kings. Herdus was not a better replacement. He came and kicked out the secular kings. He killed a lot of Chachmei Yisrael, and ultimately, in like a tshuva odyssey towards the end of his life, Herdus decided to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. Chazal, the remaining portions of Chazal advised him to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash as a way to get some reward. Now, Herdus was also greatly influenced by Roman architecture. And a lot of the he was also he's the one who invited the Romans into Eretz Yisrael, which ultimately is one of the contributing factors that led to the downfall of Klal Yisrael. But he was very impressed by Roman architecture, and there's many sites in Eretz Yisrael today that you could go to that are built by Herdus. Herdus was a great builder, and it's similar to ancient Rome, like the Herodian, his castle, and the different cisterns that he built. He also greatly expanded the Beis HaMikdash. And the Temple Mount, the Har Bayis that we know today, this large expanded Har Bayis, is Herdus's expansion of the Har Bayis. Now, some of the stones are even Roman technique. I'm not a stone carving expert, but those who are say that some of the stones have clearly was Roman craftsmen who are hewing these stones and carving them out. They're modern Roman technique, and he built this Har Bayis extended retaining walls for the Har Bayis. Now, the stones that are there, so just facts on the ground, the Kosel is about, I think it's 28, I could be wrong, maybe it's 44, I don't know, the number offhand is escaping me, how many levels of stones there are. I think it's 44. The first 28 of them are ancient, like either from Bayis Rishon or Bayis Sheni. Most of those are buried underground. Only a few of them, of those super large stones, are the ones like Mamish at the foot of the Kosel. Above them are later stones that were added on by Mamluks, by Turks, and maybe by Moses Montefiore, who definitely showed a lot of interest in the Kosel, wanted to purchase areas around it. There's some legend that says that he added a few layers of stones on the top. It's, I think, unconfirmed one way or the other, but actually that's what the Kosel looks like today. Now, the Kosel as a Makom Tefillah, so what's interesting is that if you go back, so right after the Churban, the Jews were actually remained, and many of them still came to visit the Har Bayis. Now, during the second revolt, which is
or
1 second. That's what I want to get to. Yes. So during the second revolt of the Jews against the Romans, so then the Romans eventually ground the entire area to paste. They didn't want any Jews around there. They later on persecuted the Jewish religion. There's tons of Xeris, Asar Malchus, a lot of them that we talk about it from that Tkufa. And people stopped going. And for a long time, Eretz Yisrael was very desolate. There was very few Jews who lived there, Bechlal, and the ones that did lived up north in the Galil. That was the area where they lived. Now, at a certain point, during the Tkufas Rishayim, there was little, drips and drabs of Yidden who were coming back to Eretz Yisrael to try to, there was a continuous Jewish presence there, but very, very limited. And over drips and drabs, it came to Yerushalayim, so much so that when the Ramban, who comes in the 1200s, writes about Yerushalayim, he writes there's not even a minion here. Meaning, so it's the desolation and the lack of Jews there is crazy. So the Messiah of davening at the Kosel obviously didn't exist in those days because there just was not a lot of Jews around. Now, what's interesting is that the Rambam, when he writes about his trip to Eretz Yisrael, writes about davening on the Har Bayis, to go to everyone's question. He writes about davening on the Har Bayis, and clearly they knew which areas of the Har Bayis were actual Beis HaMikdash Har Bayis and which areas were just, decorative and architectural from Herdis's expansion. And they knew where they were allowed to go, where they were not allowed to go. Today that Messiah has been forgotten, or at least has not been continuously transmitted, and therefore modern psak holds that it's also to go, and no card-carrying Haredi goes in the Har Bayis. There are plenty of people, Erliche from Yidden, who go in the Har Bayis, but no Haredim go on the Har Bayis, because in the 1967, after Israel recaptured Har Bayis, there was a big psak with a Kol Kairah from many Gedalim, various different stripes. Again, that's not really the topic I want to talk about today. Okay, this is just Ba'if and Akdama. I don't really want to talk about this now.
But what he expanded didn't become Mekadosh?
No, he didn't have the ability to Mekadosh extra.
It's not him. The question is,
you can't make more Har Bayis. No, there's a size that Hashem said, this is the Har Bayis. I designate this area. Here's the.
It says you could add on if you do
with certain processes, but not to give it the kedusha of Har Bayis. So Herdis didn't get that kedusha. Now the Kosel itself, when Sultan Suleiman the Great, who's an Ottoman sultan who came in the 1500s, he's the one who built the Chaimis Yerushalayim, the walls we have around Yerushalayim today, those great walls. He realized that the Kosel was something special to the Jews, and how the Kosel was rediscovered. It seems the Kosel was lost. It was totally buried under garbage or streets or buildings, and Sultan Suleiman dug it back out, or had people dug it back out. There's stories about that, whatever, not for today. And he gave the Jews a small simta, like a few feet, at the Kosel to daven by. Now, it was not something where they daven tefillas at. It was more something you went to for Tisha B'Av, for Kinnis, or for Tikkun Chatzos, or for a personal tzara or something, which is how it got the name the Wailing Wall. The Kosel Hamaravi was always called the Wailing Wall. Like if you look at any old pictures, let's say from the 1800s, they refer to it as the Wailing Wall. It's because mostly for wailing. It was for crying. It wasn't something that had organized fields in general. Now, this went on for hundreds of years during the Ottoman period of Eretz Yisrael. Now, when the British took over Eretz Yisrael in the 1900s, after World War I, when the Ottoman Empire collapsed and the British mandatory period took it over, mandatory Palestine, the British, who were always juggling between their commitments to the Arabs and their commitments to the Jews, and hence the problem that exists in Eretz Yisrael still till today, they outlawed sitting by the Kosel, they outlawed davening by the Kosel, they outlawed blowing shofar by the Kosel, they outlawed installing any furniture by the Kosel, meaning an amud, a bima, an aron, even a chair, a bench, because certainly not, because they didn't want Jews to daven at the Kosel. They didn't want that to become a makom tefillah. So during that period, the Kosel, you could say, diminished a little bit in its status as a makom tefillah. Now, 1948. The Jordanians capture the old city of Yerushalayim, including the whole Rova, the Jewish quarter, all the shuls. The Churva was destroyed for the second or third time. Bunker Hill, Ammunition Hill, right over there. Yeah, the Tveras Yisrael synagogue was destroyed. So much things were destroyed. Now, in the ceasefire agreement that the Jordanians made with the Israelis, they agreed that Jews would still be able to go visit the Kosel. They did not keep that condition of the ceasefire agreement, and Jews were certainly not allowed to go to the Kosel during those from 1940. What do you say?
I think people went anyways.
Not during 1940, no. There was no man's land. You couldn't cross. It was very dangerous. No. From 1948 to 1967, nobody went. This had a very strong impact on various people. This was like a big tragedy. Rabbi Pesach Frank, who was the Rav of Yerushalayim, the Rav of the Ir Atikah, he put out a kuntris called, it was published under different names. One was called Churbana Shel Ir, one was published under a different name. I forgot the name now. Today, I don't think it's in any of his svarim, but a whole like kina. It was on the 30th day anniversary of losing the old city. He made a tainis with kinnis and slichas, and he baklugs, like he talks about losing the Kosel, losing the Churva, losing Yerushalayim. He's very, very sad about it. Others, for example, Rabbi Goren's father-in-law, the Rav Nazir, David Cohen, I don't know if you've seen a picture of him, long hair. He was a Nazir. He in his life's mission was to become a Navi, albeit unsuccessfully. But he wrote a sefer called Kosel HaNevuah. He was a very eccentric but interesting person, a Talmid Chacham. He was so broken by losing the old city, in 1948, that he made a nether never to leave his home until the old city is back in Jewish hands. And for 19 years, he stayed in his home, stayed in his apartment. There were 2 times that he went out. He had to make a Taras Nedarim. I don't remember. I have to look at his biography to remember what the 2 times. The 2 times he made a Taras Nedarim to leave for special emergencies, special reasons. Otherwise, the man stayed in his house for 19 years. So it was like a very big tragedy. Now, in 1967, during the 6-Day War, after the Jordanians joined the war, I think on the 2nd day of the war, the IDF launched multiple attacks at the old city. And finally, I think on the 5th day of the war, they recaptured the old city. And that's the famous clips of the army jeeps with Rabbi Goren, the rabbi driving up, blowing shofar at the Kosel, Har Habayis Biyadenu, the different radio transmissions. It's a very historic, very, very historic moment. It spurred the Satmarov to write his Kuntras Halagula Valatmura, which, if we have time, we'll get to, and how it's relevant to the Shiloh we're going to discuss. But the Kosel was finally back in Jewish hands. Now, during the fog of war, literally a day later, the Rabbanut Tzvayit, like the army rabbinate, together with the generals, had a meeting, and Rabbi Goren, who was the chief rabbi of the army, suggested that in the fog of war they should just bomb the Dome of the Rock, destroy the whole thing, and start rebuilding the Bayis Shlishi. We could get away with it now, he said. Nobody's looking. Just destroy it. Say there was some snipers there, and you have to call in an airstrike, and Achem Vei, it's gone. And the cooler heads prevailed. However you look at it, I guess that's a perspective. But cooler heads prevailed, and they did not bomb the Dome of the Rock, and instead they gave it over to the Waqf, which is like the Arab administration who Adayam Hazeh manages the Temple Mount, the Har Habayis, and they kind of left the status quo of the Har Habayis being for the Arabs and the Kosel being the place where Jews would daven. Now, they had the Kosel, but they did do something. There was a neighborhood called the Shchunat HaMugrabim that was at the foot of the Kosel. If you look at old pictures from the Kosel was about 9 feet, big or whatever, like 3 meters, whatever, something like that, 5 meters maybe, a small area by the foot of it. And then there was this whole neighborhood. It was like a shanty town of Shchunat HaMugrabim that was at the foot of it. And in the heat of war, they took bulldozers in the middle of the night and they destroyed the entire Shchunat HaMugrabim, which was vacant of people who had ran away to avoid the war. They destroyed the entire thing, and they converted a very large area that could be the Kosel Plaza. Now they have a large area, and the first thing they had to face was that they looked at the Kosel, and the Kosel looked very unimpressive. When the Kosel was this narrow, tiny wall, meaning when you stand at it like at a 9-foot distance or a 10-foot distance, it looms very large. Once you open up a plaza of a few hundred, 600-700 feet back, whatever it is, all the way back, the Kosel didn't look impressive enough. So they first of all decided the Kosel has to get taller. Now, lucky for them, the Kosel is almost as deep underground as it is above ground. So it's very easy to make the Kosel taller. You just have to tunnel down a little bit. So actually, the 2 large stones at the base of the Kosel that you've all stood by that are taller than our heads, that was revealed in 1967. They dug down to reveal the Kosel. They also gently sloped the plaza back. Not on those. Yeah, they gently sloped back the. That's plenty. They gently sloped back the floor from the back of the plaza all the way up to the Kosel to make a more dramatic entryway. Now they had a second thing that they had, and this was an issue. There was many people who believed that the Kosel should become like a national monument. Like they should put the tomb of the unknown soldier there. Like it's a Jewish national monument, that's where it should be. And
not Jewish, Israeli.
Yeah, and there were many who felt that the Kosel should be a Makom Tefillah, exclusively a Makom Tefillah. Now they had these 2 competing visions for the Kosel. In order to accommodate this, they hired an architect whose name was, I think, Yosef Schoenberg or Schoenfeld, a Yekish architect, a frum person, beard and payas, whatever, Yekish payas, but a beard and payas, a frum guy, and he designed what we have at the modern Kosel today of a stratified plateau, like 2 different stratas by the Kosel. One a few feet higher in the back, which was going to be a more general touristy-like area, and one closer up to the Kosel, which would be a more closed-in Makom Tefillah where people could daven. This is what he created. Now, this is what it is still today. It's only been modified very slightly.
Those stone things with the chains,
exactly. He's the first one who created that. Little stone things with chains with menorahs in the middle, and but then later on it got a little bit more formal. Today there's a fence which is like a quasi mechitza, meaning according to some shittas that even counts as a mechitza. It's high enough, above the ground to be a mechitza. It ended up, the system that we have today is what he created, and that really stayed since then. Now, here's the Shiloh. Okay, that's the story of the modern Kosel. I think there's a lot of things there that are a surprise. Like if that's the story of the modern Kosel. Now, here's the question. The question is as follows. There is a din in Chazal, and many places talk about it, and it's Gepaskin and Shulchan Aruch, but the Rambam in Hilchos Tefillah in Perek Yud Aleph, in Perek Yud Aleph brings down these halachas, and the Shulchan Aruch and Arachaim, it's in Kuf Nun Aleph, through Kuf Nun Daled brings these halachas, and that is as follows. There is something called the Beis HaKnesses. Beis HaKnesses is a makom that's designated specifically for tefillah, for nothing else. A place that's a Beis HaKnesses has very restrictive halachas. You're not allowed to eat, you're not allowed to drink, you're not allowed to sleep, you're certainly not allowed to make a kapandaria there, like go through it for no reason. You're not allowed to speak sicha betela or dvarim betelim. You're really not allowed to do anything else there besides davening. So now, what is the exact status, halachic status, like from a technical standpoint, of the rachvas hakosel, of this area that's laid out in front of the kosel? Does it have a din of Beis HaKnesses? Does it have a din of something else? And made a lot of communities. For example, if the kosel, that area by the plaza, is din of Beis HaKnesses, the pashtus would be that you're probably not allowed to take a picture over there. Not allowed to stand and pose in a Beis HaKnesses. Which exact sif in Shulchan Aruch says that? It's a good question. But Midina Kav Beis HaKnesses, it's not hard to make an argument that in a Beis HaKnesses, you're not allowed to do that. You're l'chayr not allowed to take a phone call and say, I'll be out, I'm coming right up, I'll be out in 2 minutes. L'chayr, you're not allowed to do that either. You're certainly not allowed to eat or drink if you brought a water bottle and take a sip of thing over there. There's many, smoke, and be another one now, you are allowed to spit. That's a din of Shulchan Aruch, you can spit minimally, but smoking would be problematic. The real main issue, and the most common one I think that applicable is the kapandaria. You're not allowed to use a Beis HaKnesses as a shortcut to get somewhere else. So, for example, back when the tunnel tours, let's say, were like on that side over there, on the left side, are you allowed to cut through the plaza of the Kosel, come straight off the buses at the entrance over there, and cut through the Kosel plaza to go for your tour? You're not here to daven, you're not here to do anything religious. You're here to go see the tunnel tours. Is that a kapandaria? That's an issue. You're not allowed to walk through.
So you need to walk through it to go to daven underneath.
That's fine. That's megs. But to walk through, I don't know where it is now. I'm not even sure. But like same. So you're allowed to do that, for example. Now, obviously, the first thing that should be jumping to mind is that perhaps the two strata of the Kosel should have different halachas. Meaning, perhaps the one that's lower down, that's enclosed, that from its original time of conception was designated as a makom tefillah. So that's a Beis HaKnesses, and that might have all the attending dinim of Beis HaKnesses with all its various chayim advarim. But the more elevated one, which is seemingly much less restricted, right? Has they let everyone more or less do whatever they want over there. Maybe that doesn't have a din of Beis HaKnesses. So now I want to show you the sugya that this is built out of. It's very interesting. The Gemara in Megillah gives us a whole hierarchy of what public funds that were used for different kedushas are allowed to be repurposed for. It's a mission on the fourth parak of Megillah. It's a famous mission that says like this: Bnei Ha'ir shemachru rechayv shalir, the people of the city who sold the rechayv literally means like the parade grounds of the city. And we have to see why that has kedusha at all. They sold the parade grounds of the city. Leichin b'dama Beis HaKnesses. They could use that money, the proceeds of that sale, to purchase a Beis HaKnesses. Now, Beis HaKnesses, if they sold a Beis HaKnesses, leichin teva, they could buy an aron. Teva, leichin mitpachas, they could buy the curtains that go around the aron. Mitpachas, yikchu svarim, they could buy neviim. Svarim, leichin Torah, they could buy sefer Torah. But the reverse, avlamachru Torah leikchu svarim, svarim leikchu mitpachas, mitpachas leikchu teva, teva leikchu Beis HaKnesses, Beis HaKnesses leikchu sarachai v'chein b'mutav b'Yisrael. So meaning there's a simple din in this mission over here. What do you say? It only goes upwards. Exactly. The money of this, that the proceeds of a sale that was once a davar shekadusha has to be ma'alim b'kodesh ve'meridi. You're not allowed to keep going. You're not allowed to go down. Now, right away the Gemara jumps in, and the first question the Gemara says is Bnei Yer shemachru chev shalir Amar Rabba Rochana Amar Rav Yechanan Zu dever Rav Nachman ben Yosi stim tasa. This member that we have in this mission over here, we're not selling it, or that it has some din of kedusha, and you're not allowed to use the money for whatever you want, is Rav Nachman ben Yosi stim tasa. Aval chachamim reimrim, the chachamim say harachayv ein ba mishum kedusha. The rachayv has no kedusha at all. Doesn't have kedusha. Why? Rav Nachman, that's his rationale. Rav Nachman ben Yosef, what's his rationale? My timer. Hayil v'ha'am mispalim by bethaniyas b'mamadis. Since the davens there, Bataniyas and Mamadis, several times, throughout a life cycle, throughout a year, there's spillover crowd. There are large audiences by a tainus or by a maimid or something like that. So they spill out into the area over there. Davens, that's what has kedusha. The Rabbanan or Chelik, they say ahu akroi ba'alma. This that the crowd spills out and davens there by Taniyas and Mamadis is akroi ba'alma. It's happenstance. It's not something that's so designated, and therefore it doesn't have it doesn't really give a kedusha. Now the din in the Rambam, let's say, and from there we'll go to Shulchan Aruch. The Rambam in Hilchos Tefillah in Perek Yud Aleph and Halacha Chaf Aleph, he says like this: Rechayv shalir, he paskins like the Chachamim. Rechayv shalir, af bisha am mispalim by, even though people daven in it, b'taniyas b'mamadis, by taniyas and mamadis, b'teisha akibutz rav ve'ein batik nesiyas machil naisan, because the crowd is very large and the Beis HaKnesses can't hold them. Aim by kedusha, it has no kedusha. Arrival a nikva l'tefillah. Now the Rambam is saying more words here than the Gemara, and this is important. The Rambam says since it's arai a nikva l'tefillah, it was never designated to be a makom tefillah. V'chein batim v'chatzerish sham miskavtzim and l'tfila eim b'm kedusha v'she kavois and l'tfila b'vad el ha'rayim mispalim b'm k'adam shem sal tech beisei. You're davening there in a very, irregular manner. It's an araidik manner, and therefore it's just like a house. It's like a person davening misal b'tech beisei. That's what the Rambam says. Now the Rambam over here added a little bit of layers. He said it's eim b'kedusha b'nei shem arai v'lei nikva l'tfila, and therefore the Rambam paskins that that this area of a Rechav Shalir, the parade grounds, has no kedusha at all. Now, if you look in Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Kuf Nun Dalid, in Shulchan Aruch, in Archaim, it says like this: Rechav Shalir, the parade grounds of a city, Af b'shem mispalim ba b'taniyas, even though we daven there in taniyas, ein ba mishum kedusha, b'nei shu arai, because it's arai. V'chein batim v'chatzer shem miskavtzim mispalim ba'akroi, ein ba mishum kedusha. That's what the Ramah says. Now, that's what the Mechaber says. Shem b'nei shu arai. So the Mechaber is a little less wordy than the Rambam. The Rambam had said that it's ein b'm kedusha, b'nei shu arai v'lei nikva l'tfila. It wasn't kavua l'tfila. The Shulchan Aruch says b'nei shu arai because it's like once in a while. Now we have to see if these words in the Rambam and Shulchan Aruch make a difference. Now the implication is from this din that something that's not designated in a serious way as a makom tefillah does not have the kedusha of Beis HaKnesses. Now if you look in the Mishnah Berurah, interestingly in Siman Kuf Nadal and Archaim, Mishnah Berurah says like this. The Be'er Halacha brings something interesting. He says v'zeh makom Rechav Shalir says I am Mishnah Berurah v'zeh makom ha'ilem mezuman lekach. This area, the Rechav Shalir, was prepared that in the case that there's a spillover, people would have room to go there. Even so, since it's only ba'akroi, it's not on a set time, it's once in a while. Ein b'kedusha, it has no kedusha. V'ayim b'ritva, he says, shadaite the b'chal makam and linig b'zayim makam hu, kivin shu mezumel l'zeh. So the Ritva and the Be'er Halacha brings this. The Halacha says that even though the Gemara says it doesn't have the din of kedusha, that only means in regards to it being tefesas dameh, in regards to the money that you sell from it, having stipulations as to what you're allowed to use it for next. But in regards to just the, when it's alive and kicking, should you treat it with respect? That the Ritva is saying you still have to treat it with respect. Now this is the Be'er Halacha. Now let's apply this Gemara that we're learning.
You can't take your phone out in the city field because they once daven Mariv there together?
No.
So.
No, 1 second. Let's.
Saying, what's the town square? The town square, because VMO, they would daven.
The town square. So the Mishnah Berurah said in Israel, the town square is designated to be spillover for the crowd's needs. So that means that in the planning board, when they plan the town square, they say, let's make sure this is big enough so that by a tainis or a mamadis, we'll have room to spill over there, we'll have room to daven there. Now, let's apply this to the Kosel. So the area that was built at the base of the Kosel, the closer area, is certainly designated as a Beis HaKnesses, right? L'chayra, the Paiskim, the people who built it, and when they built it, had no withholding. They totally wanted it to be a makam that's going to be called, and
who made that decision?
So the planning board, the architect, the government, meaning whoever makes it,
Whoever doesn't want you daven, they don't care.
No, they do. They designated the area at the foot of the Kosel was designated clearly as a Makom Tefillah. Meaning, if you look at the meetings they were having, they were faced with this like conundrum. They had two camps. Like one wanted a Makom Tefillah, one didn't. They gave you might say it was their Sar Lazazel, but they gave a Makom Tefillah at the foot of the Kosel. Is certainly a Makom Tefillah. Now the problem is, what about the upper area of the Rachos Kosel? How do you look at that now? On Shavuos or on Cholamayid or on Slichas Motzei Shabbos or on whatever different times, the Kosel is filled with people davening all the way back till Leishat Torah, right? I'm saying till the thing. Now, okay, so now what's the designation of that? Is that considered like a Rechav Shalir that is Pasha Bakrei Ba'alma? We never know when or what it's going to happen, just Bakrei Ba'alma. Or do you say no? That's designated as spillover area. 1 second, no, of course it's not Kamina. Or do you say that that's designated as spillover area for any time you need larger capacity at the Kosel? It's like, like a Chassidish shul that has those accordion walls, like to take the, all the shtibel, like Bava and Barbark, take all the shtibel rooms, so that's what that is. Meaning, yes, there's a fence there to keep it segregated for tourists to come at times when there's no proceedings at the Kosel. But when there's proceedings at the Kosel, when the Beis HaKnesses of the Kosel is proceeding and it needs, capacity space, this is the parentis of the Kosel. And do you look at that as like that's as designated? Now, what's interesting is that there's
it
chuvas.
only goes one way. If you realize when the army has their things,
they never cross. They never cross. Exactly. That's important. The army, when they do their the state does. When the state does, let's say, a swear-in, or they do Memorial Day, they light a candle there. That's always on the other side, on the outside of the plaza. They never cross in. So meaning, Kamat l'chol hadeis. Most places agree that the lower area. Rabbi Shtemel says, or Rabbi Yashiv says, from Zalman says, Kamat l'chol hadeis. The modern person says that's the din of Beis HaKnesses. Yeah, we come out on Habbat that is the din of Beis HaKnesses. Now inside the tunnels, like inside the arches, that's the base medrash. That was designated to learn. They put svarim there. They have intention to learn. That's not as chama. But outside on the plaza, fine. Now the problem is, as you're pointing out, that the upper area only ever serves as spillover for the downer of the Beis HaKnesses. It never serves as spillover for proceedings that are being done, right? It's not vice versa. So now how do you look at that? So now there's two tshuvas. There was a kolkari that came out about this, years ago, and there's two tshuvas from the Rabbanim of Yerushalayim at the time, Rabbi Tzal Zolti and Rav Shalom Asas. It's the Sephardic and the Ashkenazi rabbi. You'll guess which one's which. Of Yerushalayim at the time. Now, I just want to read you. I thought this was interesting. Rav Shalom Ashash, Rabbi Tzal Zolti is the one who wrote it. He wrote a kolkari, and he says that he believes that the higher area of the Rachas HaKosel, has the din of a Beis HaKnesses as well. Now, his contemporary, Rav Shalom Ashash, who's the Rav of Yerushalayim also, the Sfari Rav of Yerushalayim, wrote back to him and ultimately, begrudgingly agrees to him that it has a din of Beis HaKnesses. But he, in his rationale for why he didn't want that to be so, he writes something very cute, very interesting. I want to start with that. He says, "Lefi kitzadaiti, im nidme rachvas hakosel l'rochev shalir, v'adi de ein roi latzer ala kol milahavi yasuda shel mitzvah v'bar mitzvah v'chasen al makam hakadosh." If we're going to confer into the status of Rechev Shalir, the Shulchan Aruch Paskins parade grounds don't have a status of Beis HaKnesses, and we have no reason to stop people from bringing their bar mitzvah sudas there, their chasen sudas there. Shnid melahem k'meish makrivim carbon lashem, because the people who come, the simple folk who come from all throughout the world to bring their weddings or their bar mitzvah processions to the Kosel, they look at this like it's mamash a carbon. Umispalim, umisragshim, mikdushas hamakam, and they're blown away by the kedusha of the makam. We're going to not let them have their photo shoots and their l'chaim and their suda at the Kosel. Why are they here? They're not coming to daven. So this whole connection that all these Jews have to the Kosel is going to be broken. He says from outside of Israel, people come, large amounts of people come to do their simchas there. And these people don't have a house. They're tourists. They're here in Yerushalayim for a few days. If you don't let them make the l'chaim at the foot of the Kosel after they put on tefillin, after little Charlie puts on tefillin, if you don't let them, have a photographer, a photo shoot, and a l'chaim, what do you say? He's talking about Charlie in the tshuva. Yankel's relevant too, but he's talking about Charlie. He's not going to come back over here. No, Yankel might come back to daven. Yankel might come back to finish Sefer Tehillim one night. But Charlie's not coming back if you steal him, if you rob him as bar mitzvah here. Then tafad lam ben tefillah l'suda. He says, he says, maybe just put some guards at the top area of the Rachas HaKosel. Shouldn't be a bezayin, exactly. Have people there, just tell them, he says, don't get drunk, don't do mixed dancing, don't do crazy things. But you want to do a bar mitzvah, a little eating, a little pictures, a little thing. Now, Lamaisa, begrudgingly, he comes around and agrees to B'tzal Zolti, who feels that the planners who designated the Kosel built it in such a manner that it could be easily extended to include a larger crowd. And he says from day one, literally from the first Shavuos, which was like a few days after they cleared the Shchunas and Magravim, the Kosel was filled all the way to the back with Mispalim. That was from the first inaugural tefillas that happened at the Kosel. He said the Kosel was built this way, and therefore he says it's not Rechev Shalir, it's more like spillover of Beis HaKnesses. And spillover of Beis HaKnesses, he says like this. He brings... Rizal Zodi has a very fancy Shikl Torah. He says that the Shulchan Aruch leaves out a part of the Rambam. He doesn't bring the Rambam that says Ka'adam Shem Sval B'tech Beisai, because the Shulchan Aruch meant to be chayshish for the Shita of the Ritva, which is possible how the Be'er Halacha learned the Ritva, the Mechaber also, which is why the Be'er Halacha brings. He says according to the Ritva, certainly you have to be Machaber, because here is the place where people daven. When it's around, even Rechev Shalir has things. But then he concludes and he says, L'chayra, even Ladas Rambam, even according to the Rambam, which is the Shulchan Aruch's Deya, that the Mechaber and the Mechaber Paskins like, still Yesh B'Rachvas HaKosel Kedusha. Not only the basic ground level area of not doing kedusha, there's even kedusha Beis HaKnesses about the Kosel. Now to prove that, he brings an interesting Magen Avram, and I want to read you the Magen Avram that he brings. The Magen Avram in Kuf Nun Daled says something interesting. The Magen Avram brings him a Rit, a tshuva from the Rit. The Magen Avram says like this: on the Shulchan Aruch that says that the Rechev Shalir doesn't have kedusha, the Magen Avram says like this: Va'azaris shalanu. The azaris that we have, that means like our ezos nashims, or our spillover areas, or our, like by the shtiblach, the outside area, the big hallway outside of shtibel where there's more room to daven. What do you say?
Polish.
What's that? Oh, that is. But v'azaris shalanu, he says, yeah, lo yadifa mi batim v'chatzeris. V'shema says the Magen Avram. Kivin shemispalim tadir behem kol mam shein lechakim. Since we daven there always when there's a large sibur, nasu kodesh. So he, one second, hang on. So he brings him a rit, a chuvas marit, in Yeridei Chelik Beisim and Dalet, that seems to say something that is kavua to be a spillover area where when there's large sibur daven there, even the Shulchan Aruch would concede. gets a din of Beis HaKnesses. Says Rabbi Tzal Zolti, even the Rambam's day, even the Shulchan Aruch's day would concede that the larger area, the spillover area by the Rachos HaKosel would have the status of a Beis HaKnesses. Now, what's interesting, I saw later Chuvas that discuss this, is that seemingly the Marit in this Magen Avraham is a little bit out of context. The Magen Avraham suggests it just as like a Ulay Yesh Leimer. Later, Achayim, like Maruk Tzia, the Yavitz bring it down, Mamish, Gepaskin La Halacha. Now, it's probable that the Maruk Tzia, the Yavitz, did not have a Chuvas Marit. And if you look at the Chuvas Marit, the Chuvas Marit is talking about something that's radically different than what we have at the Kosel. The Chuvas Marit is talking about the Azaras, he says, and he says these very interesting words. He says the Azaras of Beis HaKnesses, the extra area, he says, which is a Makam Kavua La'atzlanim. The lazy people, is what he calls them, people who come late, the habitual latecomers, always daven back there. So the Marit says those people daven there every single day. It's not spillover in like comparison to the Kosel. Like sometimes
it's the shul.
Yeah, it's the back of the shul. It's the back of the shul. He says not spillover. Like sometimes no, exactly. He says it's not spillover. Like you have a large audience, so now it spills over. Every shul has one. Everybody knows what this is. The Marit is talking about something else, and the Marit uses those words. He says nasa kavua la'atzlanim. So if it's not Kavua Atzlanim, Kavua, it's not Arai, but it's not Arai. It's no point. That's not the point. The point is it's not Arai. It's Kavua. That's a Makatula. So that certainly gets the status of Beis HaKnesses. Now that is not such a good comp to the Kosel. The Kosel is not Makom Kavua Atzlanim. No one goes to daven there behind the fence with all the Chinese, Nigerian and Chinese tourists who are taking pictures. It's only when there's nobody there and there's mamish spillover from the Kosel daven there. Now, so this is what it says. He passes like this. Now others, Rabbi Yosef Lieberman and interestingly Rav Nevenzahl, who's the Rav of the old city, he says something interesting. It's like a footnote he wrote to the Mechaber of the Tshuva. He says, I remember when they made the split, and he says, Pasha, not a good tushtel. He read Rav Tzal Zolti's Tshuva, he read this, and he says, not a good tushtel. The Kosel is not. It's two designated areas. They had two competing interest groups that needed to be satisfied. In order to satisfy the tourist group, they made this. He says, Halacha Raya, there's no tznius there, there's no rules segregating men and women, there's no rules banning anything. They don't make them put on the shawls that they make the women put on. They don't make them put on yarmulkes that they make men when they walk to the Kosel. Then you walk to the men's side, there's a basket of yarmulkes. You walk to the ladies' side, there's a basket of shawls that encourages you to show respect. None of that is at the above area. He says there's two competing interest groups that needed to be satisfied. They're two totally different areas. And he says, so on Shavuos or on Slichos, whatever, it overgrows and it spills out. That's Akroy, that's Rochev Shalir, and it doesn't get the status of Beis HaKnesses. Now, Yechshia, ask your LOR what the actual halacha l'maisa about the elevated Rochev Shalir, Kosel plazas regarding Rochev Shalir. It's a fascinating shadow to think about. Now, there is, of course, another perspective regarding the whole area of the Kosel that maybe we'll continue next week, and that's the Satmar Shita, that we stay away totally. Maybe we'll continue.
But this is Mama Shit.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.